It was another busy and complicated week of politics. On Tuesday, Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock beat his Republican challenger, Herschel Walker, in Georgia's Senate runoff election. Here's what Warnock said during his victory speech, where he thanked his mother.
She grew up in the 1950s in Waycross, Georgia, picking somebody else's cotton and somebody else's tobacco. But tonight, she helped pick her youngest son to be a United States Senator.
Now, Warnock's win was also supposed to mean Senate Democrats would have a 51-49 majority. But today, Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona announced that she has left the Democratic Party and registered as an independent. Now, Sinema is known to be close to many Senate Republicans, but she says she does not plan a caucus with the GOP. Now, meanwhile, on Tuesday, President Biden announced his administration had successfully negotiated the release of star basketball player Brittney Griner from Russian detention. She was part of a prisoner swap agreement for a Russian arms dealer. Now, joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Maya King, politics reporter for the New York Times. And joining me here in studio, Laura Barone-Lopez, White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, Josh Gerstein, senior legal affairs reporter for Politico, and Mariana Sotomayor, congressional reporter for The Washington Post. Mariana, you know I'm going to start with you because there's so much going on your beat. It was a roller coaster week for Democrats. What more do we know about where this leaves Democrats in terms of course, Warnock winning, but Sinema saying that she's now going to leave the party? And what's behind, you think, Sinema's decision? What's driving her?
Yeah, I mean, Warnock's win was significant for Democrats. It finally broke that 50-50 stalemate that we've experienced the last 2 years. And really what it meant was, okay, finally, there's 51. What does that mean? Committees can now subpoena whoever they want. They don't need to talk to Republicans to come to an agreement on that front. You will physically see more Democrats sitting on those committees to move things faster, to approve judicial nominations that Biden might send forth, also other administration officials that may need to be nominated. So it's a little bit more procedural, but Democrats are really feeling good. This was a big victory. All of these incumbents winning for the first time in, I think, almost 100 years is something we haven't seen for a long time. And then you get this news about Sinema. It's not going to change that 51-50 dynamic. I think there were some Democrats that were very much fretting about that. She herself has not said she's going to caucus with the Democrats. However, she says, you know, I want to stay on my committees. And that is a decision made by Democratic leadership. Schumer saying, you know, she does have an independent streak. This is part of her nature, and, you know, we'll continue to keep working with her. But Republicans also seeing this as a moment where maybe they will be able to have, you know, at least an ear into the Democratic caucus, be able to maybe continue working with her in a bipartisan manner, especially since the House is in Republican hands. So there's going to be influence there.
Functionally speaking, Sinema would not go to the Democratic caucus meetings, though, even prior to this. And so she's going to continue not going to those meetings that they used to hold. The White House, you know, was asked about this multiple times today, and they said that they were really confident that no matter what, the dynamics of that 51-49 majority are not going to change. They're confident that they can still work with Sinema as a partner, and they stressed that she was a part of a lot of the things that the president got passed in the last year, including the big infrastructure bill and many other priorities. And so they didn't say if they were given a heads up or if they were aware of this coming, but they really defended her and said that she's voted with the president 93% of the time. And so they don't foresee that changing or their majority changing.
Now, Mariana, I want to go back to you because it's my understanding that Democrats are looking forward to using their new subpoena power to do things like investigate corporate abuses. This was supposed to put an end to the power sharing agreement. Is it your understanding, especially for our viewers, that this is going to change the function of the way that things are going to happen, or is the Senate sort of going to function the way the Democrats had hoped it would?
No, you're totally right. They are going to be looking at more of that and be able to investigate more thoroughly, actually get people to come forward and testify if numerous amounts of committees want to be able to do that. And I think Senate Democrats in particular are looking at this as, well, again, the House is going to be in Republican control. Everything that House Democrats have been investigating while they've been in the majority, that's something that Senate Democrats can also take up. I don't think you're going to see them necessarily lean in as much as House Democrats have on investigating Trump and those kinds of things, but they can do that if they want to, and that's significant for them.
And Maya, you covered this Georgia Senate race so closely. You broke a number of stories. You also told our producers that you were sort of up close and personal with the Walker campaign in the last few days and sort of watched it collapse and saw all this. What's your biggest takeaway from this race as someone who covered it on the ground there in Georgia?
Well, Georgia has really emerged as sort of a microcosm of so many of the trends that we're seeing in politics right now. Of course, the influence of moderate voters, the way that voters across the country sort of rejected Trump aligned candidates. And of course, that plays into this larger argument that I think has also been very exemplary here in Georgia, which is this issue of candidate quality. I think a lot of Republicans saw Herschel Walker as a shoo-in for Republicans in a year that was very good for them here in the state because he's such a big name as a football star. But what they also had to realize is that he is a football star and not necessarily a politician who is extremely untested and had a lot of baggage in his background. In the final days of this race, I did spend a lot of time with the campaign, and you could just see that they felt that the writing was on the wall. They made a number of key missteps, the biggest of those being this issue of Saturday voting. Democrats and Warnock's campaign actually sued to have their voters turn out and vote on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Republicans and Walker's campaign largely rejected that. And they saw how in these deeply Democratic areas of the state, there was explosive turnout, while in the areas that were largely Republican aligned, there just was a little bit of a dampening in enthusiasm for Walker. And that, of course, came to pass with Warnock's close to 3-point win finally on election night. But that trend really started to materialize, I think, in the weekend and days before this runoff election on Tuesday.
And Maya, I've been hearing from some of my sources that Senator Sinema's decision, it really makes Warnock's win even more consequential than what Democrats thought it was. What's your sense there on the ground about how Sinema's her decision changes the outlook of Democrats and sort of what they're thinking about this decision that she's making here?
I think if you're a Georgia Democrat, you're really thankful for the $50 million that you spent to get Raphael Warnock elected. I mean, this is a really consequential and sort of immediate consequence now of Sinema's decision. But beyond that, I spent a lot of time with Senator Warnock, too, and talked with him at length about, what he wanted to accomplish in this next Congress if he was elected. And he prioritized voting rights, continuing to lower healthcare costs, continuing to create jobs, not just in Georgia, but really across the Sun Belt here in the Deep South. And so I really wonder now what Sinema's now becoming independent could mean for Warnock's legislative agenda. All the things that I've named, they really require pretty heavy majorities in Congress, and it's going to require senators like Sinema to sort of get on board with these policies. It's very unclear if that would happen, though.
And Josh, Trump endorsed 6 Senate Republican candidates. Only one of them won. I wonder what you make of the sort of benefit possibly for the Republicans with sticking with Trump, as well as sort of the challenge that come with that, given the fact that we heard the former president talk about suspending the Constitution. We've heard the fact that he wasn't even invited this time around to go campaign for Walker.
Yeah, I think, Yamiche, that this issue of candidate quality is more than an abstract issue. It's tied to Trump. I mean, he's the one that backed these candidates, that backed Herschel Walker, that backed Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania and said these were the guys to go with. These were the ones who could get it across the finish line. And in those 2 cases, they couldn't. Now, Trump's people will say a lot of the people he endorsed did manage to get elected, but that was mostly House candidates that were in safe Republican districts where just about any Republican could have been elected. So I do think that what happened in Georgia is contributing to this sense that Trump is losing more and more traction in the Republican Party. And it's no longer sort of a whisper about questions about whether he's a good person to be leading the party going forward. You have people in the establishment that I think are more willing to speak up a little bit, even though they still remain fearful of a backlash from Trump voters.
And Laura, what do we know about sort of whether or not Republicans influence Sinema's decision? We know that she's close with some Republicans. I also wonder what you're hearing about whether or not Republicans might think that they can lobby her more now that she's someone who's an independent.
Well, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has long tried to lobby Sinema, and we've also seen where he's tried to lobby Senator Joe Manchin, the other very moderate, kind of independent Democratic senator from West Virginia. But again, the White House and Democrats seem confident that Sinema votes with them the majority of the time. And when Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer came out today, he again was saying, look, the dynamics here aren't going to change. I think that Republicans are certainly going to try to bend Sinema's ear where they can to see where they can get her to not go along with Democratic priorities in this new Congress. But even if she does stick with Democrats in this new Congress, we're still talking about a House majority that is Republican and that is not going to pass the vast majority of these Democratic priorities at all.
A really important point to think that whatever sort of President Biden wants, it's really going to stop for most cases in the House. Mariana, that brings me in some ways to 2024. Democrats were already facing an uphill battle. When you look at the Senate map of that sort of election, the coming election in 2 years, which makes my head spin a little bit, but here we are. What does this make Sinema's decision? What impact could it have on the 2024 map? Could Arizona be easier to pick up for Republicans?
It could, and that is something that a lot of Democrats were just thinking about. Is okay, we just put the 2022 midterms to bed, and today we have to start thinking about 2024. And, you know, a lot of people have been saying, a lot of Democrats in particular, thinking that she made that decision to become an independent for electoral reasons. They do think that if, you know, she knows that she cannot get elected as a Democrat. Greg Stanton, who is a Democratic member from Arizona, tweeted it. He said the quiet part out loud, basically saying, look, these are my poll numbers compared to hers if we were to hypothetically run for a Senate race, and she would lose by 40 points. Democrats just would not elect her. So this becoming an independent may help her bring in some Republican votes, get those Democratic voters who do like that independent streak within her, and maybe repel Congressman Ruben Gallego, who has not been quiet about potentially primarying her at some point. Hopefully, at least her orbit thinks this could be a signal to him that, you know what, you're going to make it way more difficult and make it easier potentially to elect a Republican to the Senate.
And Maya, of course, all eyes were on Georgia when it comes to sort of how you win a swing state. What's your reporting reveal on whether Georgia is really now a purple state? And could it be a blueprint for Democrats to try to win some of these swing states that are going to be critical?
I do believe that Georgia is a purple state, but not without significant effort on the part of Democrats. So while Raphael Warnock was successful, and of course John Ossoff won in 2021, I mean, that came at a cost of several $100 million and lots of on-the-ground mobilization and organization. Georgia is a purple state for Democrats with a whole lot of work, though I do think that Senator Warnock's win provides a blueprint for how swing states or swing state candidates can campaign, particularly to these very politically influential moderate voters in these suburban areas. I think that Warnock and his team were really savvy in realizing pretty early on, one, that Walker did have some soft spots with conservatives in the suburbs of Atlanta, but two, going out really strong with a message that was, while in part anti-Walker, very much pro-Warnock, underlining a lot of his bipartisan accomplishments. But again, I mean, this still was an extremely expensive race that did go into a 4-week runoff and required not only mobilization by grassroots groups, but lots of money on the airwaves and even a lawsuit to try to get voters back out and rebuild this Democratic coalition that in many ways is still taking shape in Georgia as the demographics change.
Really smart to sort of remind people how much it took to win Georgia. And Laura, really quickly before we turn to all of the legal challenges that Trump has had, but I want to just pause for a minute because Brittney Griner is home, right? She is someone that I know so many people around the country were praying for. She was in Russian detention. President Biden seems very, very happy about that. Of course, there is some criticism because Paul Whelan, an American, he remains in Russian detention. What are you hearing from White House officials about all of this?
So the White House was very careful as they announced that Brittney Griner would be returning home to show that they were very aware of the optics and the unfortunate case that Whelan would not be returning home with her, which they said repeatedly. White House officials told reporters this week that they were trying the best that they could for months to negotiate for Whelan to be joining Brittney Griner and to come home, but that ultimately the Russians were not willing to allow him to come home based on the slate of options that the U.S. was trying to offer them to get him home as well. They said that they they also, when they ultimately decide to bring an American home and enter into a negotiation with another country that has taken an American hostage, that they are very aware of all the consequences that could come with that. And they said that despite all the consequences and all the different things that they thought, the ramifications, they said that they still felt as though the best option was to bring her home.
Well,
and Paul Whelan's family agreed with the White House on that.
Well, an important story that will continue to follow. Thank you, Maya, for joining us and for sharing your great reporting from Georgia.